Welcome to Buddhaland Podcast. I'm Stacy. Our guest today is Dr. Nicole Pan, an international educational technology expert and senior consultant for UNESCO in the Asia-Pacific region. Before this role, she spent 20 years at the University of Hong Kong, most recently as Associate Director of the university's core curriculum, overseeing interdisciplinary courses across 10 colleges. She also briefly served as the director of Cishan Institute, where she led efforts to modernize and expand the Buddhist mindfulness practice and research. Hi, Nicole. It's so great to have you today.
Hi, Stacy. Thanks for having me here. Really a pleasure to join you.
Great. Thank you. You have worked in education and educational technology for more than 25 years. Technology is now so embedded in our daily lives that we may no longer fully appreciate its impact. What are some of the major technologies that have been applied in education, and how have they changed the learning landscape?
Yeah, this is such a big question, and it actually spans my entire career, because I remember when I first started in 2000, that's when the government is really putting a lot of funding into schools and universities to support them to switch to digitalization of teaching and learning. And so, if we talk about the present date landscape, it is still very diverse in terms of the applications and varied across schools, within a region, across the region, within a country, and also country to country is very different as well. So if we take Hong Kong as an example, Hong Kong is a very developed economy, and we started our digitalization or digital transformation of education very early. I had the privilege to actually was on board with that digital transformation from the very beginning, and really see how it evolved. And so at present day Hong Kong, like you said, we take the technology for granted. It's ubiquitous. A lot of schools, government schools, for example, the usual practice, of course, is like using the learning management systems in their schools. All schools have their own version of LMS. And then it's, of course, a lot of times is for administrative purposes to keep track of students' learning. And then also within the classroom, it's really up to the individual teachers, but they use the computers a lot. In some of the better resource schools, each child will have like a laptop or even an iPad that they can use in the classroom. And so according to different subject teachers' requirements, they will probably use some of the applications or the softwares that are specific to their curriculum subject. And then at the university level, a lot of innovation is happening, because oftentimes the university has the resources to have an entire unit that is dedicated to supporting teaching and learning using technology. And so if I take the University of Hong Kong, in my case, which I served for 20 years, there are technology like virtual reality, simulation, and then some of the subjects, students also make videos and create games. So this is Hong Kong's situation. And just to lightly touch upon other countries in other contexts. So for example, the countries that I've been to, they're one of the least resource and least technology supported places. So like Afghanistan, like Cambodia, and then also countries that I've supported was like Mongolia and Laos. They only started to really seriously consider using technology for education because of the pandemic that happened, the COVID-19. Everyone has to kind of switch to online, even for these countries where, they have very scarce resources. And infrastructure and internet connectivity is very minimal. And then oftentimes there's none. So they realize that they have to catch up on that and to build the infrastructure to support this type of online distance learning. But what we're talking about now here is really then these countries trying to assess online teaching and learning, oftentimes via their own mobile phone. So it's a very different system. So like in developed economies, like in Hong Kong, We don't really rely on phone that much. And some of the schools actually don't want students to use their phone
Hmm.
in the schools, right? So they have the proper laptops or computer labs and then iPads. But for these developing countries, they don't have the luxury of using these really well-resourced infrastructures. In a household, maybe of 5 to 6 people, they at least will have one phone that they can all share. And so oftentimes this is where they have to resort to, is to use the phone to access online education. And this is certainly the case in my experience when I was working in these countries.
Mm. Yeah, let's focus on technology for a bit. Let's just look at globally, like the new
Mm,
technologies and the advancement of technology. Do you have a favorite technology, and could you walk us through how it can support more effective learning and teaching? If we have all the
mm,
resources that we have. I know that you have worked extensively with virtual reality as well. Maybe
mm.
you could share how immersive technologies like VR open up new possibilities for education.
Yeah, so my first contact with virtual reality technology was when I was working in the engineering department at the University of Hong Kong. And at first, they didn't really think of applying it for teaching and learning. But because coming from my educational background, I saw the potential. So, before that, I was working with them to support them to design a training program for commercial companies. I was helping them to design this training program for Cathay Pacific's cargo terminals to train their staff to operate cargo operation free flights. So that gave me an idea. I was thinking like training is obviously part of learning and part of education, right? So how can we use that for our own students at the university? And that's when we started to explore the possibility of teaching students to actually not just use the program, but to create their own virtual world to tell stories. So at that time, we had this curriculum reform where the universities in Hong Kong is shifting from 3 year to 4 year. And so now you have this extra year. And so Hong Kong U actually used this opportunity to create this common core curriculum. They are inviting all the faculties to put out new courses, interdisciplinary courses. So we're thinking like, how can we combine humanities and technology? Which was sort of like, I've had this idea for many years
Mm.
because of my mixed background. I had science, technology, and also humanities backgrounds. And I always felt like they need to be integrated. And so we use this opportunity to create this course where students not only learn technical skills, like for example, creating 3D graphics and also using game engines to make these graphics interactive. But then we also ask them to create their own virtual worlds to tell their stories. When we run the course 2 times a year, we will have a different theme for them. So one of the really memorable theme for me was that we decided to ask them to tell stories about Hong Kong's past,
Mm.
especially the wall city in the Kowloon side of Hong
Mm.
Kong.
Yeah.
The Kowloon Walled City is a very famous story and history of Hong Kong. This
Cyberpunk
place,
icon.
yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of Japanese animations that are
Hmm.
associated with it as well. But this place has been demolished right before 1997. And so it has already disappeared. But then it's interesting to see how we can recreate that using virtual reality, using immersive technology so that people can experience it again to kind of recurate, retell the stories, adding present day interpretations by our students. Well, just to give you a very quick example, one project group that I was helping to support, and they got an A for their project. And the game that they created was actually, they built this portion of the Kowloon Walled City. And then the main character in the game is a cat. We actually were able to find the past tenants from Kowloon Walled City and ask these people to meet with our students and tell them what was the life like back then. And one of the stories that really caught students' attention was that almost every household would have a cat because the cat is there to serve one function, is to catch the most, right? So back then, because of the hygienic situation, not very ideal. So a lot of infestations of rat. So project group borrowed this idea and created this cat character in the game. And then when you play this game, then you are chasing the cat. The cat will be going from corner to different nooks and crannies of this small city, and you are trying to catch it.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
it's a very creative and
Yeah.
meaningful interpretation using virtual reality. So I guess this is the approach that I enjoy the most, is that I don't want students to be just passive users of technology. So for example, the emergence of artificial intelligence, AI, I have the same kind of view on this. I feel like we should give ordinary people who are not computer scientists, not computer programmers, the power of the tool to create what they want to create, So I feel like we need to connect technology to humanity and also to democratize technology so that it's not just the monopoly of a few giant tech companies or just the small percentage of computer programmers or computer scientists. So that's the creative aspect of technology that I really like.
Yeah, I mean, you just give us wonderful examples. I think it is also very empowering for students because they have more tools to learn and then to create. I think that really gives us more perspectives on how technology can support human growth. Just
Yeah.
now, you also mentioned your work with UNESCO and you
Mm,
also visited many different countries across the Asia
mm,
Pacific region, and most of
mm.
them are not as developed as
Yeah.
where we live. Um, well, many of us take access to education for granted. It remains a
Yes.
right that many young people are still fighting for.
Mm,
Apart from technology, like what are
mm.
some of the most pressing challenges you observe in a global context?
Of course, I wouldn't claim that I'm the expert in this field
Hmm.
because I've only joined development work in the recent years. But then, even in Afghanistan, interestingly, they are very keen on using technology. So, even though you mentioned like we don't have to talk about technology per se, but it's interesting to see that they are really eager to embrace it. With a cell phone, they can access the internet. But of course, this would not be possible for some of the remote areas because, as you know, Afghanistan is a very mountainous country, and in remote areas, there would not be any internet connectivity.
Or even electricity is not
Exactly.
stable.
When we try to think of programs to reach the children in these areas, then we have to think about older technology,
Mm.
but still very much alive and not obsolete. So, like radio is one technology that we were thinking of using and designing program for it. It's fairly easy for them to have a radio at home and then receiving the signals and then being able to hear the broadcasting programs. So in countries like this and in the most harsh environments with the least resources, you do have to think about what we call like frugal technology or low tech options. Then it's not really about what tools or what technology is available because humans are smart. If we want, we can always think of a solution. I think most of the difficulties come, I would say, the quality of teaching. Good teachers are really hard to come by. And I think this is equally the case across countries, right? This is not just a problem of poor countries. This is also a problem of rich countries.
Mhm.
So the human factor really matters a lot more than technology itself.
Mm.
When you have a good teacher, the teacher will think of a way to make learning happen and make learning fun and engaging and effective. But oftentimes in these countries, teachers are paid very, very low wages. So it's very hard to attract talented people to go into teaching profession in these countries. And then also the teacher training, they are also very limited because these all require financial investment from the government. And as you also probably have experienced and know, in these developing countries, rampant corruption going
Mhm.
on. And so direct investment in education is very, very limited. Yeah. So to me, that's the biggest challenge. It's not the technology.
Mm.
It's rather the human factor.
Yeah. While you were speaking, I was just thinking that maybe we should give technology more credit because they're so invisible to us now. But when you are talking about low tech, even like radio or
Mm,
smartphone, it really creates a lot of possibilities and accessibilities for young people in underdeveloped regions. Yeah, and the human factor is, of course, very important, like how we cultivate talent and how we handle our relationship with technology. These are all very big questions, and it's just really nice to hear from your perspectives, from your experience in education and education technology. Yeah, because we grow up and we gain knowledge from, most of us, from kindergarten and primary school, middle school, high school, university. And that's how we develop our intellect and our mind and our worldview. I think education is actually a bigger question than technology, or it is a major question for humanity.
That's right.
It's just now we have so much tech and business things going on that we're not giving education enough attention. We're not giving educators enough attention and support and resources. So, like you said, it's not just for developing countries. Like globally, there are some issues that have not been taken care of properly. And also, over the past few years, AI has become the dominant conversation in technology. And opinions are deeply divided. We hear concerns that students are using AI to write essays and solve math problems without really engaging their own thinking. In your view, what does AI mean for younger learners? And what do you think is the best way to integrate it into education responsibly?
I mean, obviously, this is a very contesting ground because the actual use of artificial intelligence in education has only happened in the last 2-3 years. I mean, it's again similarly. I think different countries face different challenges. And then also there are some common challenges that we all face. I was actually invited to the AI in education conferences, two of them that happened last year in Cambodia. So I still hold the same view. I feel like the developed countries faces a different type of challenge because these countries within the education system, it's highly competitive. Students at a young age are already taught how to compete with each other to gain the advantage or the higher position so that they are guaranteed a better, a brighter future. We all know this type of game. They have to work very hard so that in the future you can get into the best schools, you can get into the best universities and then get the best job. So in developed countries, I feel this type of culture, this type of mentality really will make the issue of using AI to cheat more serious. It's very easy for students to kind of just to think, oh, wow, with the power of AI can produce a lot better assignment for me. Like, for example, if I have to write a computer program as my evaluation of the course, or if I have to write an essay as part of my assessment, obviously I will use AI because it's the most effective way for me to get the best outcome and the best results. I don't care if I didn't learn anything because it doesn't matter, because it's the end that I'm aiming at. Again, it has nothing to do with technology. It's more like the human factor, the mindset, the belief, the values that we have that drive us. And also, a lot of times, as a working adult, we all know we are always chased by deadlines. We work, especially in the current climate, you have a lot of responsibilities on your shoulder. So it's even harder for us to resist using artificial intelligence for our work situation as well. So how can you blame the young people doing that? Because they are also overworked. You know, not only that they have to take care of academic work, they also have to go to tutorial classes for university students. They probably have to have several part-time jobs because they wanted to save money. It's just everyone's schedule is overbooked. So in this case, just a click of a button or a few prompts, they can produce results. And so it's very tempting. And so it's very hard for us to actually resist this temptation. Even though I'm an educator, I don't pretend that I'm a saint, that I can resist this as well. I use it for my work as well. I don't even know how we can resist using it.
Yeah, but in a sense, if everyone is equipped with AI, so in education, maybe the goal or one of the goals would be how to best use AI and also how to evaluate the work produced with the assistance of AI, right? Like if it is an unavoidable trend.
I don't want to use the word unavoidable because it's a discourse, it's a narrative, largely kind of came out of these giant tech companies that obviously their profit making depends on the use of these AI programs. I wouldn't say that there's no opportunity for more ethical use or responsible use of AI. But what I'm saying is that it really takes the individual perseverance, your self-control, your self-discipline to be able to do it. Whereas with the older technology, it's still easier, comparatively speaking, to not misuse them that much. So like, for example, social media, as you know, in the recent years, there's been this trend of countries starting to reevaluate the effect of social media on young people. And now like a lot of countries are banning the use of social media up until a certain age, especially when children enter their early adolescent years or puberty, because more and more scientific studies have proven that social media is actually harmful to the developing brain of children. And so I do feel that it takes a while, like it takes like 10, 15 years for people to realize the harm of technology. And we're just talking about social media platforms. But with artificial intelligence, it's so much more.
It's on another scale.
Exactly. It's so much more powerful because it's large language based and it's text based. So it speaks our language. It's very intuitive. This is the beauty of it. But then what I have the most concern is not the technology itself, because in a way, it's a beautiful technology because it has this kind of capability to communicate with us using our very natural, intuitive language. But like social media, when they first developed and designed a platform, according to big tech giants like Mark Zuckerberg, it was for the good of humanity, to connect people. So they said. But now, like after 10, 15 years, they realize that it does more harm than good, especially to young children. And I'm afraid that AI is the same. Like as adults, because we do have discipline, so we can still kind of like exercise our self-control when we use it, right?
I'm not sure whether adults have better self-control.
Like,
You're not sure about that.
Exactly. That's my point. So like at least, but then think about the children, think about young children. I think about teenagers, so how can they resist it, to not misuse it, to use it responsibly?
Yeah, I think especially for younger children, if they haven't really fully experienced using their own mind, then it's not easy for them to distinguish, whether they're actually using their own independent thinking.
Exactly. I actually had this conversation with a very renowned scholar, and she is actually working with a lot of researchers currently to try to build a model, a practical but ethical and responsible model to guide the use of AI in schools, in teaching and learning for teachers. And I think that's really the way that we have to go. We cannot wait around. We have to actively think of better ways, best ways of using AI for education. And I agree with her approach. Her approach is saying that we cannot just leave the technology to the children, to the students. We can't just send them away and say, okay, you can use it for this and that. We always have to accompany them. Teachers have the responsibility. When we ask students to use AI, there has to be a human teacher there to guide them and to actually be there every step of the way. And then also using that technology not to replace, like you said, their actual thinking. They still have to work their brain themselves, but then using AI in a way to help them to support that thinking process rather than replacing that thinking process. I mean, theoretically, it's easier said than done, but I do feel it's possible. And we cannot say that we just give up. We can't afford to do that. As adults, we have to even be more proactive, more caring what's going on with our children. When I was in Cambodia, I often see parents giving their kids the smartphone or the iPad to play on their own and then go about their own adult business. I often see that we really need to change that practice. With the age of AI, we have to emphasize even more on having human interactions, like parents spending more time face to face, physical time with their kids, teachers spending more time on accompanying the students doing their work. Take Cambodia or Afghanistan, for example. These are still largely very traditional cultures. They still go about the way of living in a very traditional form. And they actually have an advantage, I feel, at the age of AI, because usually in these traditional cultures and societies, community really matters. There's a very close tie among the families. They tend to have bigger families. Family ties are much closer. So I was actually talking to one of those ministry officials and telling them, don't think that because you're a developing country and you are a traditional society, that you are even more disadvantaged at the age of technology or AI. On the contrary, my view is that you have advantage because you have much closer ties. You have much closer family ties and community ties than those of us who live in the developed economy where we tend to have nuclear family structures. Neighbors don't know each other. We tend to rely on ourselves and technology to solve our life problems instead of going out and reach out to other people. So in a way, actually, I feel like the curriculum in these developing countries, they can actually leverage this type of human-centeredness to develop their curriculum, that not to use AI to replace that important human factor, but to enhance that human factor. So that's my view.
Yeah, it sounds like AI is a big issue for education and also for human development, that we're still trying to understand its impact and doing research, and then we can better react to it. But what you shared in Afghanistan is also very beautiful because they actually have a better human ecosystem that help young people to handle technology because they still have this family community structure where you have a wiser older person where you
Exactly.
get true information instead of you're just left alone, with your mobile phone and trying to figure things out yourself
Exactly.
without good traditional values that actually sustain human
Yeah.
species. And that also raises a much bigger question. What is the purpose of education, especially in today's world? This is a time when some of the most successful people we know never finished college.
Again, I feel like this is a question may have different answers depending on the context. So in developed economies, especially this kind of like the spirit of entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
if we talk about these IT companies, they all kind of emerge from the culture of the United States.
Yeah. Very
Especially
Silicon
from
Valley.
very Silicon Valley. And in the United States, it has the most mature, most developed education system. So everyone is given a chance. Doesn't matter your background. If you're rich or poor, you have access to fairly good education. And so I feel like that's why a lot of people, surprisingly, they share entirely different kind of mindset with people from Asia. People from Asia, we all think that, college education, this is like a given. You have to have it. We just take it for granted. But then in the States, even like decades back, young people there, they're not really trapped or bogged down by this kind of mentality that I need to get university education in order to make a better life for myself. And so there's this kind of spirit of being creative, being risk taking, and then entrepreneurship, right? So you have Steve Jobs, you have all these different people who were experimenting in their own garage with these kind of emerging technologies, right? So I think in the developed context, some people who are adventurous or who are creative, they have the option of thinking, do I really need to go through the university's education? Because even by myself, I can access a lot of resources. And so in that kind of environment, I agree. Like you don't really necessarily have to go through a formal higher education path in order to do this kind of things. Because in the outer world, in the bigger context, there are still other options and opportunities and resources that you can tap into to kind of create your own path. But I think in Asia, it's a different story because we're sort of like a latecomer, right? And so we still have this kind of the mentality like, oh, you have to have certain level of education, you have to have a degree, a certificate, so that you can get a better job. It's too much of a risk for us to give up our education and to go for something else. The social capital is too much. There's too much at stake for us to not go the conventional path and to choose an alternative path.
Of course, we should all be a dreamer in a sense, but at the same time, we also need to be very conscious of our environment and some of the practical limitations in a way.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and thank you for being so honest with your view, because some people may pretend like, oh, actually anything is possible. You can achieve whatever you want, but that would be not responsible. If you're talking
Mm,
to someone, for instance, from a third-tier city in China, then they actually encounter a lot of obstacles on their way of pursuit of their ideal profession or career. And I want to talk about spirituality as well, because you are a Buddhist yourself. And historically, many of our great universities were funded by religious institutions. But today, schools are far more secular, and younger generations tend to keep religion at arm's length. Do you think spirituality or religion still has a place in the contemporary curriculum? If so, how might it be thoughtfully incorporated?
So I feel like this is a very complex topic
Yeah.
because you can look at it from so many different angles, and like from a sociological angle, from a political angle, from an economic angle, from a culture angle, because religion is also a very complex system. So there's many levels and the functions and that it serves. So it's within the limit of today's conversation and time, if we just kind of approach it more simply from like maybe the education view, I do feel like religion plays a big role in education historically, and it still does, because like you said, a lot of the religious groups, especially Christianity, they traditionally they are the funders for schools and universities, and they instill their own values, their own religious beliefs and teachings. I mean, when I studied in Hong Kong, I went to schools that were supported by Christian churches. We went to Bible studies. But the interesting thing is that I feel like they try to also strike a balance between religion and secularity. I would say, like, for some of the more orthodox organizations, they try to instill more religious doctrines, right? But I think, like, from what I experienced, at least in Hong Kong's context, a lot of our schools that has this funding body from Christian churches, they try to be more secular. So there's not so much kind of like trying to indoctrinate students with their own beliefs that much. Like, when we have Bible studies, teachers also try to use stories that can connect with students' own experiences. Because I'm an educator, so I'm also always thinking, like, what is your purpose for teaching religion in a secular context, in a secular school, right? What is the purpose, and how do you go about doing that? What is the pedagogy that you use? What is the methodology that you use? So even though I'm a Buddhist, because of my formative years experiences studying in these Christianity church supported schools, I do appreciate they do have more methods. They do have more creativity in terms of trying to make that balance, right? But I think in the recent decades, because of the diaspora Buddhist masters from a lot of different regions to the West. And so there's this kind of infusion of Western methodology, Western values, and then also combining and integrating with Buddhist teachings. So like the movement of mindfulness, and then now you have like well-being, social emotional learning that is embedded into more kind of modern interpretations. So in a way, I feel like Buddhism also, like many other religions, trying to modernize itself, to trying to infuse itself into the Western type of knowledge domains. So, like psychology. So,
Yeah,
like
that's true.
for example, in the recent years, there's this positive psychology field and also neuroscience, and they borrow a lot of idea from Buddhism. And Buddhism also proactively interact with these scientists to trying to kind of connect with them as well, and trying to infuse some of the contemplative aspect of the religion to these knowledge domains. And I feel like there's also this concern that in this kind of interaction that you might lose something important. You might lose something, some essence of what is really important, for example, in Buddhism or in Buddhist teachings. I think there's always this kind of concern, like it's if it's too much, too accommodating to the modern ideologies from the West, then we might lose our own essence or our own core teachings. So just to give an example, the mindfulness movement, it has become very secular, and they even promote and emphasize that anyone can take up the practice of mindfulness without any religious associations or connections. And I'm sure a lot of Buddhist practitioners and Buddhist masters, they would not agree with that, because meditation has a different deeper meaning within the Buddhist practice other than, this kind of secular take of mindfulness. Just to give you an example.
Yeah.
Mm,
We also explored like this mindfulness movement. Like you said, I think most Buddhists or Buddhist masters, when we examine the techniques, I mean, the techniques are
mm,
not wrong, but just the techniques themselves are not enough for the purpose of meditation.
mm,
I understand it is a very complex, but also fascinating topic, like how exactly, we
mm,
should incorporate spirituality or religion into our curriculum. The reason why I ask it, because I feel the world is changing so much, with the technology. What defines humanity is actually spirituality. But I don't think we have had enough discussions on spirituality in our education. I agree that it shouldn't be like making students religious, but how we can empower them with good values, with spiritual aspect of being human, and
mm.
then also embrace technology. But I understand it is a very big question, but I hope that more people will look at these factors in education.
I do feel, for example, some of the Tibetan Buddhist masters'
Hmm.
approach is actually feasible because they do try to emphasize universal values within the Buddhist teachings. So, like, kindness, compassion, care, try to do no harm to others. So, I think it really depends on the audience. I think to the largest group of people who don't necessarily convert themselves to Buddhism, I do feel like they still can benefit from the teachings of Buddhism, especially those that are being emphasized and preached. Like I mentioned, compassion, kindness, generosity, all these good qualities of human beings. And then to people who are more attracted to the philosophy, the teachings, and want to explore deeper, then there could be a different level of teaching that is offered to them. So it's not one size fits all kind of solution when it comes to this. And I do feel like the people who are implementing it, like I said, they do need to ask them the question, what is the purpose for me to create these programs, create these learning experiences?
Yeah. Talking about purpose, my last question is 7 years ago, when we met at the Xizang Monastery, that's a time
Mm,
when you just walked away from a very stable position at Hong Kong U to
mm,
explore very different paths. What
yes.
have you been searching for professionally and perhaps personally?
Wow. That's actually, it sounds simple, but it's a very deep question.
Hmm.
I am
So I
still
leave it to
asking
the end.
myself. It's a very good way to end this
Hmm.
podcast, actually, because I'm still asking that question myself even now. Because as I evolve from this experience, even though it's not too long, but it's also not too short. It has been like 4 or 5 years, and so I think initially there are different factors involved. But the most obvious reason that I can observe in myself is that I'm getting tired of working in that particular context. because like you mentioned, I've worked in the academia for 20 years. And then, this group of students that come in, which every year I interact with them. I guess it's also because of my personality. I do feel like I need to have new stimulations and also to have new adventures and to fulfill myself, right? So at that time, I was thinking that I'm at that age and at that stage of my career that I have accumulated enough experience. But I feel like I'm not using these experiences, my knowledge and skills to the full potential. And I've always wanted to serve people who are in need. To build a more equal world has always been very kind of my central core values. So when the opportunity presented itself, especially because it was a Buddhist organization, and I'm a Buddhist, it was very hard to resist. I think if I have to relive that experience again and to make that decision again, I probably went for it again. Even though it didn't really work out, I have to say, because I also left the organization within a year. I wouldn't think that I would regret that decision because at that time I feel like this is my calling. This opportunity is too good for me to pass on. It's the same situation. Like, I didn't choose to go to Afghanistan. It was that, opportunity that presented itself. Someone invited me to go there to support girls' education because the Taliban took over, and then trying to see if we can create some online distance learning program to allow girls to continue their education. Gender equality is also a very central value for me. So at the time, I was also thinking, like, I cannot say no. They really need that support. Who is going to give them that support? And if I can actually contribute in any kind of small way to make these girls' life better, I would have to do it. So I think it's a combination of those things. But if you look at it from a more practical, I wouldn't say practical, but like a more realistic way, then it doesn't make sense, right? Because you have a very good career. And I have very good colleagues. I had a very good boss that I work with at HKU. Why would I leave that job? And it pays really well too. So if I put on my kind of like practical, realistic hat, then I would say, okay, that's probably not a good idea. It's like I follow my heart. So at that time, I would probably do the same again if I were given a second chance.
Yeah, I think so too. Giving your personality, I think if we are aware, then we really want to understand what this life means for me. Then everything just takes care of itself. One thing leads to another. Yeah, I think that's a great journey. And I'm very happy that you are doing a lot of meaningful work in different regions. And you are
Thank
also
you.
experiencing things that you would otherwise not been able to experience.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for these experiences. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone else because I do feel like I'm extremely lucky because financially, my husband has a very stable job. And even though he told me that he hates it now, but then it allows me to have this kind of opportunity to take this kind of risk.
Yeah.
And to go for this kind of adventure and experience. But you do have to have a very supportive system behind you for you to go and do this kind of thing. So I wouldn't recommend it to anyone else. And I can tell you, it's not easy. There are things that I need to give up, and it will cause inconveniences to my daily life. I'm just speaking from my own very unique situation and my own personality. And Stacy, we've known each other for many years, so exactly. So what I can say is I'm very, very grateful for my experience, and I try to pass this on whenever possible to other people to also allow them, if possible, to pursue their own dream. Yeah,
Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights with us today. It has been such a thoughtful conversation. Thank you for listening to Buddhaland podcast. Wherever you are, we're grateful that you showed up. Until next time.